Hi, this video is going to help you remember the key events in how the Nazis went from being a small party that few people voted for in the late 1920s to the largest party in Germany in 1932 and to Hitler being democratically and legally appointed Chancellor or Prime Minister of Germany. As always, there's a lot to remember, so I'm going to make it nice and easy. All you need to do is remember our keyword. Hitler becomes Prime Minister or Chancellor. Chancellor. C, the conference at Bamberg changes and reorganises the Nazis. H, hype propaganda gets Hitler heard. A, anger over the Treaty of Versailles. N, there's no jobs because of the Wall Street crash. C, the communists scare business leaders and the middle classes. E, elections in 1932, they win 37%. L, leader Hitler is charismatic. L again, louts that SA disrupt the opposition. O, offer Hindenburg von Papen offer Hitler the chancellorship. And R, the Reichstag is weak. Our first letter is C, the conference at Bamberg. Although few people vote for the Nazis in the 1920s, they hold a conference for Nazi supporters at the town of Bamberg to meet up and discuss how to make the party stronger. There's a dispute between the left-wing side of the party, led by Gregor Strasser, who believes they should try and make the country more equal and appeal to the workers, and the more right-wing side of the party, led by Hitler, who believes they should focus more on nationalism and getting the support of big business. Hitler wins the power struggle, and the party agree to follow his ideas as supreme leader or Führer of the party. The other huge change to the Nazis in the 1920s is they become a more national party. They appoint Gauleiters or regional leaders to campaign in every region of Germany to try and get elected. Although in the short term this doesn't have a huge impact because they still win few votes in 1928, by the 1930s they are in a position to get elected in every region of Germany. So it's a massive change, and they reorganise at the Bamberg conference. Our next letter is H, hype or propaganda gets Hitler heard. Joseph Goebbels is appointed Gauleiter or regional leader for Berlin, and he really focuses on using new techniques like advertising and radio to get the Nazis' message across. They don't just put up posters saying vote Nazi, they put up different posters to appeal to different groups in different places. They also create their own newspaper called the Volkischer Beobachter or the People's Observer, and they also hold huge rallies, particularly at Nuremberg, where they get the SA men in their uniforms to march and look really, really organised, impressing people. Many business leaders come to support the Nazis because they see how organised they are at these rallies. And Hitler's speeches, which we'll talk about later, are very, very powerful, but they're not just heard by Nazi supporters who attend the rallies, they're also heard all over Germany because Goebbels is very clever and broadcasts Hitler's speeches on the radio and gets them printed in the newspapers so Germans all across the country can hear the Nazis' message. Our next letter is A, anger over the Treaty of Versailles, Germans agree with Hitler. The Nazis said the Versailles Peace Treaty wasn't fair because it had been forced on Germany by Britain, France and America after World War I. The reparations Germany was ordered to pay were crippling the German economy, and they'd lost so much land so it was even harder for Germany to get its economy going and pay this back. Not only were they angry about the land they'd lost to France, but the land in the east they'd lost to Poland they were especially angry about because they felt they'd won the war against Russia, conquered a huge amount of territory, and that territory was rightly German. On top of this, many Germans also agreed with the Nazis that the loans Stresemann had taken out were a bad idea because they borrowed money from America, and if America wanted this money back, Germany would be crippled. And that's exactly what proved right in 1929, which brings us on to our next letter, N, no jobs. In 1929, American banks on Wall Street in New York City crashed, and that created a Great Depression or downturn in the American economy. American banks then demanded the return of the money they'd lent Germany in the Dawes Plan and the Young Plan. That left the German government and many German businesses bankrupt, and as the businesses closed, workers lost their jobs. Those unemployed workers didn't have money to buy things, and so more businesses closed and more people lost their jobs in a downward spiral into the German Great Depression. By 1932, 6 million Germans were unemployed, and the figures were particularly high amongst the young, with people homeless and queuing for soup kitchens and queuing for work. And that's exactly where Goebbels and the Nazis put their propaganda posters. You can see from this image they're queuing for work, and on the wall is graffiti, vote Hitler. The Nazis' message seemed more powerful during the Great Depression because they've been warning of the dangers of borrowing money in the Dawes Plan and the Young Plan, as you can see from this poster from 1929. There's a strong argument that this is the biggest reason Hitler becomes Chancellor. If there hadn't been an economic crash, then maybe the Nazis would have never become popular, but that's for you to decide. Our next letter of Chancellor is C, the communists scare business leaders and the middle classes. It wasn't just the Nazis that grew in support after the Wall Street crash. The communists had also said the American loans were a bad idea, and the communists said that crashes like the Wall Street crash would keep happening unless the workers took over all private banks and businesses from the rich and ran the country more equally. Naturally, this scared Germany's big business leaders who were worried the communists would take over their businesses and possibly even kill them. The big business leaders had been impressed by the Nazis' organisation at the Nuremberg rallies, and particularly the SA, who were willing to fight the communists on the streets. Some began to see the Nazis as their only possible protection from a communist revolution, and they decided to get together and fund the Nazis with the Reichstag Front in 1931. This is a really important point because yes, the Nazis were clever and they reorganised, but you can only reorganise yourself nationally if you've got the money to do so, and the money came from big business leaders. You don't need to know this to pass your exams, but many of these companies that helped the Nazis still exist today. You'll often find yourself in a lift made by Thyssen and Krupp. Well, Fritz Thyssen and Alfred Krupp were both big backers of the Nazis, and both their companies made money using slave labour from the Nazis' concentration camps. Another big company that supported the Nazis was the IG Farben chemical company. Today that's been broken up into companies like Bayer and Agfa. But IG Farben made the Zyklon B gas that was used to murder 6 million Jews in the gas chambers during the Holocaust. And again, Fritz Meyer, head of Bayer, was a big supporter of the Nazis. Many of these business leaders were convicted of war crimes at the Nuremberg trials following World War II, but both Meyer and Krupp were released early, in Krupp's case to help America during the Korean War, and he even later was celebrated on the cover of American magazine Time. So there's a really strong argument that communists scare business leaders into supporting the Nazis, and if the communists hadn't been popular, many of those business leaders might never have supported the Nazis. Our next letter of Chancellor is E, elections. Many of us remember Hitler as an undemocratic dictator, but it's really important to remember that they were democratically elected. In 1928, if you look at this election, very few people supported the Nazis. What changes? The Wall Street crash in 1929. So by the time of the next election in 1930, the Nazis have grown in support, and as you can see, so have the communists. And then in 1932, with that Reichstag front behind them, the Nazis win 37% at the election, becoming the biggest party. But Hitler's still not made Chancellor because some people in the German establishment fear him. So in November, they hold another election trying to reduce Nazi support, and it doesn't work. The Nazi support does go down, but not very much. And finally, Hitler becomes Chancellor, but we'll come to that next. Really important, if you remember one election, 1932, the Nazis are the biggest party, they get 37%. The next letter of Chancellor is L, leadership. The Bamberg Conference, appointing Goebbels as head of propaganda and getting business support with the Reichstag Front are all examples of Hitler being a good party organiser. But probably more importantly, Hitler's leadership is charismatic. His speeches really carry Germans along with him. He's a great orator, that means a great speaker. And he gives Germans hope in his speeches. Many people say they come to hear Hitler speak and they feel inspired, and that's why they vote for him. The next letter of Chancellor is L, louts. We've already discussed how the SA, Hitler's brown shirts or paramilitary, impressed business leaders marching in their uniforms at the Nuremberg rallies, but they also impressed business leaders because they were willing to meet communist violence with violence. They attacked and fought communists on the streets and intimidated socialist and communist party rallies before elections. And it's important to realise the SA had massively grown in support during the Great Depression. They had their own brand of cigarettes to try and encourage people to join and make it seem like an exciting organisation to be part of. And by 1932, they had 400,000 members, which is bigger, remember, than the German army. So they really seemed to some the only way of stopping a communist revolution. Our penultimate letter of Chancellor is O, offer. We've already discussed how the Nazis became the biggest party in the 1932 elections, but Hitler was not appointed Chancellor of Germany. That's because the establishment didn't trust him. Instead, a right-wing politician called von Schleicher is appointed to replace von Papen, and this leaves von Papen really angry. So von Papen in December makes a deal with Hitler that Hitler will become Chancellor, but von Papen will be Vice-Chancellor. And then von Papen persuades the President Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as Chancellor. Both von Papen and Hindenburg underestimated Hitler. They thought they could control him. Why did they think this? Well, this comes on to our next point. Our final letter of Chancellor is R. The Reichstag was weak. The German Parliament and German democracy just didn't seem to work. Because of the proportional representation voting system, there were lots of different parties and lots of different politicians elected to the Reichstag, and they just didn't seem to agree. As you can see from this table, in the 1930 election, there were 16 different parties elected to the Reichstag, all trying to come to an agreement and make some kind of decision. Throughout the Weimar Republic, the Socialist Party had always won the most seats and formed coalition governments. So in 1929, the Chancellor was a socialist called Müller. But when the Great Depression hit and all those new people were unemployed, the Socialist Party could not continue to pay large benefits to all the people at the same time as having very few people paying taxes because people were out of work. And the Socialist coalition collapsed. So next in comes Brüning of the Centre Party, but lots of his decisions get blocked by the other parties in the Reichstag. He doesn't seem to be able to make a decision, and eventually he's forced out and replaced as Chancellor by right-wing von Papen. Von Papen calls an election but doesn't quite win it. The Nazis come in and win the election, and instead of appointing Hitler, Hindenburg appointed another right-wing politician called von Schleicher instead. Von Papen is angry about this and eventually makes his deal that Hitler will become Chancellor with von Papen as Vice-Chancellor. So Germans are just fed up at this point. They've had 4 different chancellors just in 1932, and it seems like democracy is chaos. The Reichstag and democracy is weak, and they just want something else, and Hitler is promising that he will bring strong government. So there it is, another simple way to remember a difficult and complicated part of the course with one word: Chancellor. Chancellor. We can group the events we've learned into different interpretations of why the Nazis become popular. First of all, is it that the Nazis are skillful? I've put these in green. The conference, they reorganise the party at Bamberg. Hype, Hitler uses propaganda to be heard. The Hartsberg Front, they get support from big business. And the SA disrupt the opposition. So the Nazis win because of their own skill at getting elected. Another slightly different interpretation is that the Nazis get elected because Germans genuinely like their ideas. Germans are angry over the Treaty of Versailles. Germans are generally scared of the Communist Party, and Germans like Hitler. He's charismatic. The best example of this is, well, they won 37% of the vote, so a lot of Germans did like them. Another interpretation is it's not really the Nazis' skill, it's actually just chance, it's just circumstances. The Wall Street crash gave them the opportunity. If the Wall Street crash had never happened, Germans would never have listened to the Nazis. And another different interpretation is not the Nazis' skill, it's mistakes others made. It's the weakness of democracy in Germany that gives Hitler the opportunity, and it's the misjudgment of von Papen and Hindenburg in trusting Hitler. So now it's up to you, what is your interpretation of why the Nazis got elected in 1932? Just remember, one word: Chancellor.